Hello, everyone. Dr. Stillman here. And today I wanted to talk about light medicine of the 21st century. Why did I decide to host this webinar? So many of you know that I've been writing about, blogging about, talking about light as medicine for probably about 7 or 8 years now. The reason that I got so interested in light as medicine came about because I was practicing what you might call mainstream functional medicine, which is pretty far outside of mainstream medicine. And I found that despite the fact that we were using cutting edge techniques, therapies from the biochemistry, nutrition, and also pharmaceutical world in what I was doing, we still had a certain number of cases where no matter what we did, they didn't get better. And we weren't sure why this was. And a patient of mine came to me and pointed to the work of someone who was writing about the power of light as medicine. And I started to read and I started to study, and I read more and more books and articles. And basically for 4 years, pretty much straight, I read endlessly about light and electromagnetics and the body and all these different things, and began to incorporate light as medicine into my practice with sometimes very startling results. And today I'm joined by my friend Kathleen Horstmeyer, who should be joining me now. Hey, Kathleen, how are you? So you're muted. And I'm going to let you stay backstage and figure that out with Michelle. Hopefully you will be able to figure that out, and I will just keep going.
Oh, okay, here we go. Here we go. We're good.
Excellent. So today we're talking about light as medicine. Kathleen was having trouble getting on, and now we're here.
Now we're here.
So I was just talking about how I arrived at using light as medicine in my practice. And we wanted to create a series of webinars where we talked about the theory, the principles of light as medicine, and then get into the different modalities that are available for use for light therapy. We are not going to mention product or company names in these modules. There's a very clear reason for that. Companies and products change, their quality changes. And we wanted this to be a broad overview. These webinars are going to be starting with this very broad overview, just talking about why we think light's the most important medicine for the 21st century. And then we're going to get into light for brain health, cancer, heart disease, all kinds of different applications of light therapy. So without further ado, Kathleen, thank you for joining me. Kathleen works for or with the Quantum Biology Collective. She's got a long history as a healthcare provider with lots and lots of different training and has been in this space for a long time. So Kathleen, thank you for joining me.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. It's my favorite subject after my grandchildren and horses.
That's great. And so I was just telling people about how I got into this. I'm curious, how did you get into light as medicine?
I had been in traditional medicine for many, many years, as was my husband. And we were getting a little disillusioned, got off into the traditional naturopathic world. And that made a difference. And then, but there was still something missing. And we found Dr. Jack Cruz, and we went down that whole rabbit hole with him about light. And it just kind of blew our socks off because it's so foundational. They have a saying, I don't know who did it, but light shapes life. And it's so simple, but we lost it. We got kind of focused on complexity, making everything complicated. And so back to the simplicity of light, and then finding out it's narrow that widens into everything, and it's just amazing to me. Everything it does. It's so exciting to me what has happened with light and what we're seeing now with it.
And let's talk about how it's coming back into medicine, because I've thought a lot about this, because you know what Kathleen alluded to is the fact that light is obviously driving a lot of the life on planet Earth. I mean, you go to the Arctic tundra in December and nothing is growing because it's totally dark, right? Nothing could be more obvious than that. And you go to the tropics, right? A completely different part of the world, and everything is bright and sunny, and the heat is absolutely sweltering, and everything is growing everywhere. no matter what you do, so long as there's enough water, right? So the power of light on biology is obvious and undeniable. However, human beings invented the electrical light bulb and really electricity as we know it in the late 1800s, proliferated it as a technology through the early 1900s. Essentially, electrification had happened by the mid 1900s, but we actually didn't have good technologies to study light during that period of time, by which I mean we only had the crudest methods to measure light in its intensity, the specific frequencies and wavelengths of light. Even when Einstein described general relativity, we had very little information with which we could work or measure and quantify light and qualify what it was or its properties. Why? Because all of our light sources were very broad spectrum. You look at an old-fashioned incandescent bulb and it emits light across a really wide range of frequencies. Mm-hmm. The sun is very much the same way. It emits light across a wide range of frequencies from the infrared up through the ultraviolet spectrum. And because of this, our eyes are not adapted to discern different frequencies of light except very broadly. So you can tell red from green, but within the red portion of the spectrum, you might not be able to discern the difference between a red that is only 10 nanometers of the red spectrum and one that spans the entire spectrum. And, you know, it's hard to draw an analogy to anything else I know in life because light is so foundational and fundamental. But the basic premise here is that scientists have only recently developed the means to really study light the way we would like to in medicine in recent years. And because of that, when you look at the history of light in medicine, there's not a lot of attention being paid to it. And part of that also has to do with the profit models of medicine. So if you, for example, come out with a blockbuster drug and you keep it on patent and you get it approved for an indication, all of a sudden you can have millions and millions of people on that drug buying it every day, taking it every day, refilling it every month, year after year after year. If you, for example, figure out that a wavelength of light at, 1024 nanometers, just pulled that one out of thin air, heals a certain problem or really is really good at fixing a certain problem in the body, you can't patent that wavelength of light. So there's a great challenge in studying light as medicine to find a way to actually monetize it. What does that mean for all of you practically? It's really hard for people to commit research funding to light as medicine because they will not see a return on the investment. And we may, people may say, oh, well, this is so bad, we should have public funding for this and whatever. We're not here to get into a policy debate. In 2024 in the United States, this is why light does not take center stage as medicine. And this is why pharmaceutical drugs have, at least until, I will say, have over the last 100 years or so become the dominant force in medicine, although the disillusionment with them, I would say, is now driving people into new paradigms and new modalities. This has, of course, coincided with light becoming more and more popular, more and more well-studied, more and more well-known. With the internet, people are able to gather and disseminate information like never before. And so light as medicine has really taken off as a topic on the internet. And that's actually where a lot of my original subscribers and traction on social media really came from. So I think that light is poised to be the medicine of the 21st century where, different basically biochemical constructs, whether they were pharmaceuticals or supplements or minerals, were really the mainstay of therapeutics in the 20th century. And it's not that we're leaving those things out or abandoning them. They have a lot of value, but there's a huge opportunity here for people to learn about light as medicine. And that's why we wanted to do this series of webinars.
Indeed. It was the foundational thing that we all began with. We never even thought about it. We were always outside. We always had it. We always got it. It's free. And then we got really smart and we moved inside and hid away from it. And now, since then, in the last 100 years plus, we're seeing epidemics of all kinds of diseases, a lot of them mitochondrial diseases, all associated with light.
Right. And so I'm glad you mentioned the mitochondria because it's worth talking about them as and talking about sources of light in nature and how light really affects our biology, because I've done many podcasts on this, written many articles, but I'm going to just lay it out here in really simple terms. So I think of light as medicine in three basically categories. There's infrared light, there's visible light, and then there's the ultraviolet light. I'm not going to address, and we're not going to deal with in this course, therapeutic applications of microwave and radio wave radiations. There are those applications. They're emerging. They're new. They're not something I specialize in. There's not something Kathleen or I are an expert on. We want to focus on those three frequencies as we go through these modules. So first of all, infrared. Infrared light is 40-something% of sunlight. That's going to vary depending upon your latitude, the time of year, the season. But a huge proportion of the light falling to Earth is infrared light. We know it as heat. The other place that you get infrared light from is the Earth. Geothermal energy is infrared light being emitted by the Earth through various means. This is part of why, infrared light is healing to the body, because it helps tune your mitochondria and improve their overall health. That's why, in the same breath as talking about the rise of chronic disease as we've moved indoors away from the sunlight, our number one source of infrared light, Kathleen mentioned the mitochondria. And this link between mitochondria and light is critical for people to understand, because if you don't understand that mitochondria emit light, then you really don't understand how mitochondria actually produce energy within the cell. And for those of you who don't know about mitochondria, we're not going to give you a masterclass on that today, because it would be a long masterclass. But the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It essentially takes biochemical substrates, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And after they've been broken down into their smaller components in the cytosol of the cell, it shuttles those components into the mitochondria, where they are burned or combusted or reacted in such a way that they are broken down into smaller component parts. And this culminates with the production of CO2 and water. And this is the reverse of photosynthesis, which starts with carbohydrates, C6H12O6. There's 1-to-1 carbon to oxygen, and a 1-to-2 carbon to hydrogen ratio in carbohydrates. And that's exactly the same ratios as CO2 and water. Why that's so important is that for decades, scientists focused on the fact that the mitochondria was producing CO2 and water and was creating ATP out of the combustion of these substrates. However, the reality is that what they were missing or not focusing on was the fact that light was being liberated from every single one of these reactions. So as these things are burned in the mitochondria, red and infrared light are emitted by the mitochondria, and this then orders or structures cellular water to create energy generation. What we also know about mitochondria and disease in general is that in modern times, illness, these chronic epidemics of everything from heart disease to cancer, diabetes, weight gain, metabolic dysfunction, autoimmunity, allergy, virtually all modern diseases come back to mitochondrial dysfunction and problems with metabolism related to mitochondria. And why that's so important is that if you can fix mitochondria, you can see significant improvements in someone's health, up to and including the reversal of disease, which we see often with people who are using light therapy. And what people don't understand about the mitochondria is that they don't just respond to biochemical or neurological or hormonal manipulation. Although they will respond to all these things, a lot of modern medicine that works is affecting mitochondrial function with things like drugs, supplements like vitamins and minerals, changes in the ratios of different macronutrients, or even pharmaceuticals that manipulate biochemistry at the mitochondrial level. By doing this, you're changing or augmenting or improving the light emission of the mitochondria to create more energy within the cell to then address disease. This is a very fundamental, I know that was a lot. That's a lot of big concepts broken down very, very quickly. You could read about any of those concepts for weeks, months, years, and still not get to the bottom of them. But that's the fundamental model of light as medicine. Light coming out of your mitochondria is structuring cellular water to improve energy generation. It is created by the breakdown of these substrates, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins or amino acids. And light itself can fix a broken mitochondria that is not able to burn these substrates at the appropriate rate and the appropriate ratios to create this water that then creates that, and light that then creates this structured water in the cell that then creates what we call life. And that's why I start with light therapy with talking about infrared light, because of all the different modalities that I use in my clinical practice, the ones that have impressed me the most are the ones that deal with infrared light. Kathleen, thoughts on that? Anything you want to add before I move on to visible light?
Yeah, in the short version of that, or the grade school version would be go out in the sun, expose your eyes and your skin to sunlight, and you're going to increase your energy. It's going to increase the battery that's in your cells, in your mitochondria, and it's that simple. I mean, Dr. Stillman knows a lot more than any of the rest of us about all the other things it does, but in general, light gives us energy.
That's exactly right. And so the number one thing that people tell me when they start using infrared light therapy, which can be a number of different forms. It could be sauna. It could be going out and getting sunlight on their skin. Infrared light therapy could be geothermal springs. I talked about this, like geothermal springs. People will often feel much better. They'll experience healing, significant healing when they're just getting into, hot springs. I used to go to hot springs when I lived briefly in Colorado because I knew that they were healthy. I knew about the health benefits of this. So this effective infrared light is fundamental to cellular health, well-being, and vitality. And we're going to talk as we go about different modalities that access infrared light. We're going to talk about that at the end of the talk today. So that's infrared light. Visible light is red up to the blue and violet portions of the spectrum, and then beyond that is ultraviolet light. Visible light has a lot of different properties, but where I'm going to focus my time is in the red portion of the spectrum. So red is another color in which there are frequencies of light that really have powerful effects on the mitochondria. And this is where I want to take a moment to talk about the differences between the importance of being precise with frequency, because this is something, and one of the things about light that really surprises people to find out. So I mentioned earlier that your brain or your eye may not be able to tell the difference between red that is, 100 or 50 or whatever nanometers different in terms of its wavelength. What that means is that you may not be able to discern the difference between two wavelengths of light that are very different, but are similar enough that you can't tell the difference. But that doesn't mean that they have different effects on your body. It turns out that very specific frequencies of light, specifically within the infrared and the red portions of the spectrum, have disproportionately positive effects on your body. So for example, a wavelength of 1,010 nanometers might be far more healing or beneficial to mitochondria than 1,050. Now that's only 40 nanometers different. You can't see 40 nanometers with your naked eye. You would have to have a microscope, a pretty powerful one, in order to see the difference with a microscope. But your body is able to tell the difference. What this means is that if you're going to use light as medicine, you actually have to get into what specific frequency are you using and what is its therapeutic property. We might wonder if perhaps there are a myriad of effects on our bodies from the frequencies within sunlight. Maybe there's a reason, or maybe our body finds a use for all the frequencies that we receive of infrared light from the sun, because there's not a uniform distribution. There's a lot of different frequencies coming in from the sun. When it comes to therapeutics, what you'll find is that the best light devices on the market and products on the market utilize very specific frequencies to do very specific things. Because when we've studied them and broken them down and isolated them in the lab, we see that they have different effects. What this means is that you can't extrapolate what's going to happen to the same person with a different type of light therapy, even if it's in the same range of frequencies. And you can't extrapolate what happened to one person to another person with light therapy. This is another thing that really defies or frustrates people who are married to the dominant scientific paradigm that's now in the medical medical, I would say, industry, which is essentially the gross materialist, gross reductionist, scientific materialist perspective. And that is that, living things can be reduced to component parts and processes, that they can be isolated and studied in isolation, and that they don't have interrelationships that can't be quantified and qualified with our conventional understanding of science. Now, there's a lot of things about light that break those rules, like, for example, this frequency property of light. And I like to quote Nikola Tesla, who said, to understand the secrets of the universe, you have to think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And doctors and medical scientists are not taught to think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. They're taught to think of lock and key biochemistry. We put this molecule into the cell and we got this result. Therefore, this molecule does this. But let's throw a wrench into that model. If light is altering the dynamics of the cell, which it is, then technically changing the lighting of a lab might change the results of a laboratory investigation. If you change the lighting under which patients are being studied with, say, a drug, you will see a difference perhaps in the outcomes of those patients and that drug. Maybe it makes the drug better, maybe it makes the drug worse, but it may change those things. The fact that this is in the blind spot of the entire biomedical industrial complex, and believe me, as someone who was very deep in that complex in academic medicine for some period of time, I can tell you that they are totally and completely ignorant of this and absolutely lack any appreciation for its subtleties. That's a huge confounding variable for all of our therapeutics. And that means that a lot of what we've found or concluded to be true or settled science may actually be overturned in future years when these things are studied not in isolation or not in a lab where the lighting is all fluorescent and essentially unnatural, but when they're studied out in nature under natural frequencies of light because of these properties of light on biology.
Yeah, it's going to be a game changer. We know it, don't we?
I know, we do. And we see it
everything.
Well, we see it every day in how people respond to light therapy. But I want to impress upon you all the fact that one of the things I found most consistently with light therapy is that people and their responses differ from each other. And they've been taught and trained by this gross materialist, reductionist medical paradigm that if you all take aspirin, you should all experience pain relief. If you all take Tylenol for your joint pain, you should all see less joint pain. If you all take antibiotic, you should see the swelling and redness in your, affected organ where there's an infection go down. If you all, take this, you should all see that. That falls apart in the light as medicine paradigm because the results vary a lot. Sometimes it is easier to extrapolate results. Like, for example, the way that the first person to really document light therapy as medicine, I would say, was in the 1900s, a guy named Andre Mester, and I think it was Austria. He was trying to determine if red light could be used to destroy cancer cells. And so he was shaving these mice of their hair, and then he started to expose them to this red light. And he didn't find anything useful, as far as I know, having to do with cancer. But what he did find was that the mice who were illuminated with a certain frequency of red light, their hair grew back faster. That's where you're going to see lots of things like red light therapy caps for balding. There's real virtue or value in that. I would point out that all those frequencies are present in sunlight, which most people today are not getting any of. And I wonder to what degree our modern epidemic of hair loss might be ameliorated or even resolved with adequate sunlight on the head to stimulate growth of the follicles within the scalp. So, visible light, back to visible light. The red and infrared portions of the spectrum are the ones that are most healing to the cell and therapeutic, from what I've learned, to the mitochondria. So when I'm looking for new phototherapy devices, that's where I'm looking, and that's where we're going to spend the majority of our time in this series. But I want to give people a full overview so they understand how all this stuff works together. Above the red portion of the visible spectrum, you get into the yellows and oranges, which, as far as I know, do not have significant therapeutic benefits. And then you get into the blues and the greens. Blue and green light time your circadian rhythms. They wake you up in the morning. They keep you awake during the day. And if you're exposed to them through tech devices, screens, cell phones, tablets, computers, etc., you are very, very likely to have those things keep you awake because they are stimulating your brain in such a way to keep you from falling asleep, because that's what you're supposed to do in nature. We are diurnal mammals, which means that we're supposed to be awake when the sun is up. We're supposed to sleep at night. And the introduction of high doses of blue light into our world has really caused significant disruption of human circadian rhythms. We see lots of people getting better just by blocking blue and green light with glasses like blue blockers, such as Kathleen is wearing. And when they start wearing these glasses, they see an improvement in their sleep. And you wear them after sundown. And we're not going to get too deep into blue blockers because, we're focused here today, or here in the series, on red and infrared lights specifically. But I mention this for the sake of completeness. Blue blockers protect your circadian rhythms and help you go to sleep at night by protecting your eye from blue and green light that will tell it that it's day, and that will by extension tell your brain that it's daytime. So I tend to tell people to wear these after dark or for 3 to 4 hours before bed for optimal sleep, rest, rejuvenation, and regeneration. And I'll mention as well that all the diseases that we see manifesting in people due to an abundance, or a overdose or overexposure of blue and green light, we see these illnesses in clinical practice responding sometimes quite radically to the use of blue blockers to protect those circadian rhythms.
Indeed, that just establishing light and dark, because we've blurred the lines.
Yeah.
We don't go out in the morning anymore to get the light in our eyes at sunrise or shortly after. And when it's dark out, we keep the lights on. We have screens on. The blue light from the screens is telling our brain through our eyes it's noon. And so that confuses our mitochondria. They don't know what time it is. And you might think, well, what does that matter? It's so, our bodies is so fascinating. It's so amazing. And everything is time. There's a time for everything. And when you confuse that clock, you end up with mitochondrial diseases of all kinds, which is what we're seeing.
Yes. And the point I would make to people about that specifically is that when we optimize your lighting environment, the light that you're living under during the day, the light that you're exposed to after dark, if you then begin to use light as medicine outside of that, as we're going to talk about in this series, you will get better and better and better results. People who are trying to use light as medicine without understanding these fundamental relationships of different frequencies to their biology are not going to get great results. They may get some results, but their results are going to pale in comparison to what they could have if they really embraced the whole paradigm of light as medicine. Indeed. So the last frequency of light that I'll mention is the ultraviolet spectrum, which gets a very bad rap because it's basically been blamed for the epidemic of skin cancer. But what I'd like people to think about, and I'm not going to give you a masterclass on skin cancer today. That's coming up in one of our webinars here at Stillman Wellness. So make sure you're on our email list. That's going to be sometime, I believe, this summer. Because I like to say that if the sun causes skin cancer, then spoons make people fat. This oversimplification of, people get more sunlight than they get more skin cancer is simply not true. We know this because in studies of electrical line workers, the electrical line workers don't get more melanoma as they've had more years on the job. If melanoma specifically was related to sun exposure, electrical line workers who work outside every day, all year round, would have the highest rates of skin cancer of basically any profession other than other outdoor laborers, right? But line workers are easier to study because they're in unions, or many of them are anyway. So ultraviolet light is actually essential for overall health. And as a matter of fact, as your sun exposure goes up, your risk of death goes down. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the most pernicious lies in modern medicine that people need to avoid the sun because they need to be worried about skin cancer. But in real terms, skin cancer in the United States kills about 12,000 people per year, which is not nothing, but it's very, very little compared to the top killers of disease, the top two of which I'll highlight, cancer and heart disease, both of which are linked to a lack of sunlight, both of which are linked to a lack of vitamin D from ultraviolet type B light. These are very important considerations for people because it's clear when you look at this literature that light is one of the most powerful therapeutic agents that we have. It's one of the most important ones that we have. And living in ignorance of how light is shaping your life is a recipe for early chronic disease and death. This also means that embracing light as medicine is a critical part of achieving optimal health and well-being and performance in our modern world, which is fraught with new perils, tribulations, dangers, toxins, and stresses that our bodies are not adapted to. And that's why we decided to sit down and create this series.
I think this is the best thing you could do.
Yes, absolutely. So in closing, this series is going to be about light as medicine. This has just been our basic overview. I wanted to walk people through the different frequencies of light in broad categories. So that infrared category, visible light, which we broke it down into red and then green and blue. And then we talked briefly about ultraviolet light. Understand that all of these are present in sunlight. And that's part of why, and they all have a healing power during the day. Blue and green light have a disruptive power at night that we need to be aware of. But red and infrared are universally, I would say, healing. And we're going to talk more about this as we go, but no one's ever, to my knowledge, documented a link between worse health and more red and infrared light. And that's why now, today, you'll see that the bulk of light as medicine is coming out of these frequencies. People are isolating different frequencies of red and infrared light, and they're creating different devices to harness the power of these frequencies in order to, as I like to say, create wellness out of illness. And the way I explain these dynamics to people so they understand them, and I mentioned Nikola Tesla's quote about if you want to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration, is that people in this gross materialist mindset that has become the modern dominant mindset about health and wellness, they tend to think in terms of life, in terms of its component parts, its building blocks, right? Carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, copper, zinc, phosphorus, all the different elements of the periodic table, right? These things combine in order to create you, and they combine in order to make you who you are. However, life, in order to create order out of disorder, in order to create something out of its component parts, life has to have a signal that then triggers it to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Light is the signal that life relies upon in order to decide what to do at any given moment. There's other signals it responds to, electromagnetic forces of all kinds, like radio wave radiation, microwave radiation, electrical and magnetic fields. That's a whole other topic. Sound and vibration. There are open questions in the literature about what is the energy behind thoughts? What is the energy behind emotions? What are these energies and how do they then become manifest in the physical body? We know that energies of this kind have an effect on our physical health. We know this from the field of mind-body medicine. But no one has yet reduced this to a simple, well, here are the photons that make you angry, or here are the electromechanical vibrations that make you feel shame. So there's lots here for science and medicine to understand. But what's critical for people to understand right now is that a lot of that is future research that may never actually come to pass. When we're looking at light as medicine, red and infrared light is where, in my opinion, the bulk of the action is. And that's what we're going to be talking about in the remainder of this series. And we're going to break it down by different organ systems and different disease states so that people can understand how to use different modalities in order to help themselves, their friends, their family, their patients, if you're a practitioner, or clients, if you're not necessarily someone who says or describes the people they take care of as patients.
I'm thrilled about it. I'm so excited that you're doing this.
Yeah, it's going to be really fun. Thank you for joining me, Kathleen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And any closing thoughts? Anything else you want to add?
One thing that came to mind as the last you were talking about is red light is always present in sunlight. Blue light and blue and green light are not, and they're never in nature alone where red light is.
Yes.
And then we have them now. We've made that in our screens and our overhead lights. We're having this blue light, blue and green light, without the red, and
Right.
it's making some big dents in our physiology.
Right. And what people need to know about that is that, well, there's so much we could talk about with that. It's
You know,
really big topic. One of the things that comes to mind is the fact that, and I meant to touch on this in the ultraviolet light section, but as we've moved indoors and gone out of the sunlight, rates of skin cancer and melanoma have actually risen.
Exactly.
And they've risen despite, and the dermatologists will say, well, it's because people are living longer. Well, even as people's lifespans have plateaued, rates of these diseases have gone up and people are getting them earlier. So it can't be the sun. It has to be something to do with the environment. And one of the problems we see that I think is behind this is that, as Kathleen mentioned, indoor lighting, they've edited the infrared and the red light out. If you look at modern fluorescent bulbs, LEDs, they emit mostly blue light, and then they emit enough red, orange, yellow light to fool your eye into thinking that they're balanced. But they're extremely different from sunlight. It's the same difference between, say, organic whole wheat flour that's been turned into bread by just adding water and some leavening agent or some yeast, and totally packaged, processed bread that's riddled with pesticides and loaded with food additives, right? These are the same food, but they are radically different. In the same way that people have this distinction in their minds now, fortunately, between natural whole foods and synthetic processed foods, people need to think about light in the same light, pun intended.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
What's real? What happens? What's whole? The whole light, the whole food.
Exactly. And what happens in nature? I like the quote from a guy named Jonathan Wright. He's a medical doctor who's one of the pioneers of integrative medicine in the United States. And he said, when in doubt, copy nature, because you're not going to go far wrong. And I've found the more I've studied this, that the further you diverge from nature's plan, oftentimes the more inadvertent side effects or problems and unintended consequences you create. And we're going to be talking about how red and infrared light are used therapeutically in order to deal with a lot of the unintended consequences of modern lifestyles, modern illnesses, modern diseases. We're going to talk about different modes of delivery. We're going to talk about our favorites and so on and so forth. And I also want to mention to people that if you're not, you should get on our email list at stillmanwellness.com. We put out educational content like this all the time. You will get updates on when the next episode will air. It's going to be in 2 weeks. By the way, we're skipping next Monday. And then after that, it should be every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern. But don't hold me to that because things come up and sometimes we have to reschedule. And today we had some technical difficulties. I also want to mention to you that if someone shared this with you, they probably have a light therapy device or technique or tactic or product that they would like to share with you that they think will help you. And so I encourage you to go back to that person, talk to them about light therapy, tell them you watched this video, thank them for sharing with you, and be open-minded to anything that they may bring to you, because we will be blown away by how much light can really shape life and how we're using it now as a therapeutic in modern medicine. So
indeed.
Any closing thoughts, Kathleen, beyond that?
That's it. I think you nailed it right there.
All right, great. So make sure you're on the list, stillmanwellness.com, and ask or talk to whoever invited you to watch this video, because they have more to share with you. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take care. Have a great day and tune in next time.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Stillman.